The early morning sun cast a golden hue over the city as Officer Bradley Carter pulled into the drop-off lane of Prestwick Academy, a prestigious private school known for its elite student body. His son, Jake, sat in the back seat, his small hands gripping his Spider-Man lunchbox. "All right, buddy, have a great day," Carter said, ruffling Jake's hair as he put the car in park. Jake grinned, flashing the gap from his missing front tooth. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too," Carter replied, watching as Jake disappeared into the grand entrance of the academy. He took a sip of his coffee, letting the warmth settle in his chest. Another ordinary morning. Until something caught his eye. Two black teenage boys were walking near the school entrance, both wearing Prestwick Academy's signature navy mule blazers. Carter narrowed his eyes. Something felt off. He knew most of the students at this school, or at least the ones who fit in, but he had never seen these two before. Suspicion prickled at the back of his neck. He let his instincts take over, flipping on his patrol car's lights and pulling up beside them. The boys stopped walking, exchanging a glance before turning to face him, their expressions calm but alert. Carter stepped out of his car, his tone clipped. "ID cards. Let's see them." The taller one, with neatly twisted hair, spoke first, his voice steady. "Sir, we're students here. I'm Malik Mitchell and this is my brother Noah. We forgot our IDs at home." Carter scoffed, folding his arms. "Forgot, huh?" Malik nodded. "Yes, sir." Carter studied them. Their uniforms were clean, pressed, identical to the students he had just seen walk into the school, but still a familiar doubt gnawed at him. He had seen too many cases of people pretending to belong where they didn't. Their actions, violence, manipulation, and power could reach. "You two need to come with me," Carter said, his voice firm. Noah's hands clenched at his sides. "Sir, we're just trying to get to class." Carter took a step closer, lowering his voice. "This is a private school, one of the best in the city. You really expect me to believe you go here?" Malik's jaw tightened. "We do." Carter sneered. "How? That tuition isn't cheap." A thick silence settled between them. The boys didn't react, not with panic, not with protest. They just stood there, composed. Too composed. "Get in the car," Carter ordered. "Now." Without a word, Malik and Noah slid into the back seat of the patrol car. Their silence was unnerving. Most kids in their position would be crying, begging. But these two? They sat still, their faces unreadable, like they knew something he didn't. Carter started the car, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Why weren't they scared? His radio crackled. "Carter, what's your location?" It was Captain Maria Toros, her voice sharp. "Detaining two suspicious individuals near Prestwick," Carter responded, keeping his eyes on the road. A pause. Then, her next words made his stomach drop. "Carter, those are District Attorney Henry Mitchell's sons. Pull over. Now." Officer Bradley Carter sat in the cold, sterile office of District Attorney Henry Mitchell, his hands clenched into tight fists on his lap. The air in the room was thick with tension, the kind that made his skin prickle. Across from him, D.A. Mitchell sat behind an imposing oak desk, his piercing gaze drilling into Carter like a laser. Carter had been in tough situations before, but this was different. This wasn't a routine reprimand. This wasn't something he could smooth over with a half-hearted apology. He had arrested the DA's sons. Without cause. Captain Maria Torres stood to the side, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Mitchell exhaled sharply, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Officer Carter, do you have any idea what you've done?" Carter cleared his throat. "Sir, I—" Mitchell held up a hand, cutting him off. "You profiled and detained my sons, two teenagers walking to school. Do you realize what could have happened if they weren't my children? What if it had been someone else's kids? What if there weren't cameras at the school proving their identities?" His voice, controlled but firm, carried the kind of weight that could ruin careers. Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He knew he had messed up. "I should fire you," Mitchell continued, leaning forward. "I should have your badge and your career buried under so much litigation you'd never work in law enforcement again." Carter's stomach twisted. He could feel Torres' eyes on him, but she said nothing. Then Mitchell did something unexpected. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "But firing you won't change anything." Carter's brows furrowed. Mitchell exchanged a glance with Torres before folding his hands together. "You need to understand the community you claim to serve, Officer Carter. You see those boys, kids like Malik and Noah, and you assume they don't belong." He paused. "I want you to see the world from the other side." Carter felt a sinking sensation in his gut. Torres finally spoke, her voice even but firm. "Effective immediately, you are reassigned to the 9th Precinct in Oakwood for 6 months." Carter blinked. Oakwood? A predominantly black neighborhood, a district he had always associated with high crime, gang violence, and hostility toward cops. A place he had avoided unless absolutely necessary. Mitchell's voice was low, sharp. "If you want to wear that badge, you'll spend half a year working in a community you've spent your career profiling." Carter's jaw tightened. 6 months in Oakwood. This wasn't a reassignment. This was exile. His first day at the 9th Precinct was exactly what he expected, hostile. As he stepped through the station doors, officers turned, their conversations halting. He could feel their stares, their judgment. They knew who he was. At the front desk, a grizzled sergeant barely looked up. "They're waiting for you in the captain's office." Carter squared his shoulders and walked in. Behind the desk sat Captain James Holloway, a black man in his late 50s, built like a retired linebacker, with the presence of someone who had seen everything. His dark eyes assessed Carter with a mix of disdain and amusement. Beside him, Detective Aisha Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She didn't bother hiding her contempt. Holloway gestured to the chair. "Have a seat, Officer Carter. Let's talk about your next 6 months." Officer Bradley Carter had been a cop for 15 years, but nothing had ever prepared him for what it felt like to be the outsider. On his first week at 9th Precinct in Oakwood, he patrolled the streets like he always had, observing, analyzing, maintaining order. But the streets were watching him too. Everywhere he went, eyes followed. Shopkeepers turned away. Mothers pulled their kids closer. Conversations died the moment he stepped near. Even fellow officers kept their distance. He was a pariah. One evening, Carter pulled into the precinct's parking lot after a frustrating day. The community's rejection gnawed at him. They treated him like the enemy. He slammed his car door shut and started toward the entrance, then froze. His patrol car had been vandalized. Bright red spray paint stretched across the hood and doors, the words, "Watch yourself, cop." The tires had been slashed, and the glass of the passenger window was cracked. For a long moment, Carter just stood there, staring at the damage. A slow rage bubbled inside him. He could handle people ignoring him. He could handle the cold stares. But this? This was a direct challenge. Footsteps approached behind him. Detective Aisha Reynolds. She leaned against a nearby car, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Welcome to Oakwood," she said dryly. Carter exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is how you people handle things?" Aisha's eyes flashed. "You people?" Carter clenched his jaw. "You know what I mean." "No," she shot back, "I really don't. So why don't you spell it out for me, Carter?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Aisha pushed off the car, stepping closer. "You think this is random? That someone just happened to pick your car?" She let the words sink in before continuing. "They know who you are. They know what you did. This isn't about vandalism. It's a message." Carter ran a hand over his face, frustration mounting. "I get it. They hate me. Aisha shook her head. No, Carter. They don't trust you. Big difference. Carter scoffed. I don't see much of a difference right now. Then maybe you should start paying attention. Aisha nodded toward the street. You walk around here like it's your job to control them. You never once stop to learn about them. They're not going to trust you just because you wear a badge. Carter exhaled sharply. He had spent years believing his uniform commanded respect, but here it meant nothing. Aisha studied him for a moment before saying, Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., the community cleanup starts at Booker Park. Show up. Carter frowned. Clean up. You want them to see you as more than a badge? Pick up a damn trash bag. Without another word, she turned and walked inside, leaving Carter standing in the parking lot, staring at the graffiti on his car. He thought about saying no, about ignoring her, but deep down Carter knew this was bigger than him. The next morning he showed up. The morning sun cast a hazy glow over Booker Park, where a small group of community members had already gathered for the cleanup. Officer Bradley Carter stepped out of his patrol car, feeling the weight of every skeptical gaze that landed on him. This wasn't his usual beat. This wasn't his world. As he approached the group, conversations quieted. Some volunteers barely acknowledged his presence. Others stared openly, their distrust unmistakable. A few children whispered to each other, their eyes wide with curiosity, or maybe caution. Among the crowd, Detective Aisha Reynolds leaned against a park bench, arms crossed, watching him. You actually showed up, she remarked. Carter exhaled, keeping his voice even. I said I would. Aisha tossed him a pair of work gloves and a trash bag. Good, then get to work. Carter took the gloves, hesitating for a moment before pulling them on. He wasn't here as a cop today. He was just another set of hands. At first the work was mechanical, picking up litter, clearing overgrown brush, hauling bags of trash to a collection site. But the atmosphere remained cold. No one talked to him. People worked around him, not with him. Then an older man approached. Mr. Louis Carter, no relation, was a long-time resident of Oakwood. Late 60s, sharp eyes and a presence that demanded respect. He studied Carter for a moment before speaking. You ever done real work before, officer? He asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Carter met his gaze. I put in my time. Mr. Louis snorted. Wearing a badge ain't the same as working with the people you claim to protect. He handed Carter a rake. Let's see if you can keep up. With that, Carter spent the next hour side by side with Mr. Louis, raking leaves, clearing debris and sweating through his uniform. The old man barely spoke, but there was an unspoken test in every movement. Was Carter just here for show, or was he willing to put in the effort? Slowly, the energy around him shifted. A few volunteers started giving him small nods. A woman handed him a bottle of water. A teenager muttered, "Good work, officer," before hurrying away. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the cleanup wrapped up, Carter wiped sweat from his brow and looked around. For the first time since coming to Oakwood, he didn't feel completely unwelcome. Mr. Louis clapped him on the shoulder. Show up again next week, Officer Carter. Maybe then we'll start believing you're serious. Carter nodded, surprising himself. Yeah, I think I will. From a distance, Aisha watched, a small smirk on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to get it. The call came in just after dusk. House fire, Maple Street, possible occupants still inside. Officer Bradley Carter was only a few blocks away when the radio crackled. He hit the sirens and sped toward the scene, his pulse quickening. Fires in Oakwood weren't uncommon, but this one was different. When he arrived, thick black smoke billowed from the second-floor windows of a small, aging duplex. The neighbors weren't waiting for help. They were already acting. A bucket brigade had formed, passing water from hand to hand. A few men had grabbed garden hoses, spraying down the flames as best they could. Others yelled toward the second floor, trying to reach whoever was still inside. Carter jumped out of his car and scanned the scene. His police training told him to control the perimeter, wait for the fire department, and keep civilians back. But that wasn't what was happening here. This community wasn't waiting. They were saving their own. Then he heard the scream. Monsieur Foster is still in there. His gut twisted. Miss Foster, the same elderly woman from the senior center, the one who had eyed him with caution at the community cleanup. Carter didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the house, just as two young men were hoisting a ladder against the second-floor balcony. He recognized one of them, Jalen Wright, a teenager he had once stopped and questioned for looking suspicious. Jalen's eyes flicked to Carter, full of recognition and distrust. "What are you doing here, cop?" "Help him," Carter said, grabbing the base of the ladder. Jalen hesitated but didn't argue. Above them, another young man smashed the second-floor window with a crowbar, clearing the broken glass before climbing inside. Moments later, he reappeared, an unconscious Miss Foster in his arms. The ladder wobbled under their weight. Without thinking, Carter stepped in, steadying it with all his strength. A moment later, Miss Foster was safely on the ground. As the fire department finally arrived, Carter stood back, watching as the community surrounded Ms. Foster, checking her pulse, making sure she was breathing. Someone handed Carter a bottle of water. He turned to see Jalen, his expression guarded but no longer hostile. "You really came in," Jalen muttered. Carter took a sip of water, then nodded. "Yeah, I did." Jalen studied him for a moment before nodding back. It wasn't much, but it was the first time someone from Oakwood had looked at him as something other than the enemy. And for the first time since arriving, Carter didn't feel like one. It had been 3 months since Officer Bradley Carter was assigned to Oakwood, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a stranger. People no longer turned away when he walked down the street. Shop owners acknowledged his presence. Some even gave him a nod. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was progress. That's why the message on his car hit harder than he expected. He had just finished grabbing coffee from a corner shop when he stepped outside and saw the bright red spray paint scrawled across the windshield of his patrol car. "We don't forget." The words sent a chill down his spine. Carter looked around. Whoever had done this wasn't far. He could feel eyes watching him. Footsteps sounded behind him. Detective Aisha Reynolds. She stopped beside him, her gaze flicking over the message. She didn't look surprised. "This was inevitable," she said. Carter clenched his jaw. "You think this is some kind of reminder?" Aisha crossed her arms. "It's not a reminder, Carter. It's a test." Carter exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. He had worked hard over the last few months to prove he wasn't just another cop who saw this community as a threat. But someone wasn't ready to let him move forward. Aisha watched him carefully. This is their way of asking, are you really changing, or are you just waiting to go back to the way you were? Carter stared at the message again. He had spent his whole career believing that respect came with authority, that his badge automatically made him one of the good guys. Oakwood had taught him different. He ran a hand over his face, sighing. "So what do I do?" Aisha tilted her head. "You keep showing up." Carter let out a bitter laugh. "That simple, huh?" "Not simple," Aisha corrected, "but necessary." He looked around again, feeling the weight of the message still heavy in his chest. He had made mistakes, he knew that. But the only way forward was to prove every single day that he was better than the man who had pulled over Malik and Noah Mitchell that morning months ago. Aisha patted his shoulder as she walked past. "See you at the community center tomorrow?" Carter nodded, his resolve hardening. "Yeah, I'll be there." He didn't clean the message off his car right away. He left it there, a reminder that he still had work to do. The knock on his apartment door came late, too late for good news. Officer Bradley Carter opened it to find Detective Aisha Reynolds, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You need to come with me," she said. Carter grabbed his jacket without question. The air outside was thick with tension as Aisha drove them toward the precinct. "What's going on?" he finally asked. Aisha's grip tightened on the wheel. "Malik and Noah Mitchell were just attacked outside the community center." Carter's stomach dropped. The twins he had once profiled, the same young men who had been patient with him despite everything. "Are they okay?" he asked, voice tight. "They're in the hospital. Noah has a broken arm. Malik got it worse." Aisha shot him a sharp look. "Witnesses say 2 men jumped them. One of them was wearing a police-issued jacket." Carter stiffened. "You think it was a cop?" Aisha didn't answer. Instead, she pulled up outside the precinct and parked. "Come inside." As Carter followed her in, he could feel the shift in energy. Officers moved around him differently. Some avoided his gaze. Others whispered. Captain Martinez stood in the middle of the bullpen, arms crossed. Next to her, looking furious, was District Attorney Thomas Mitchell, the twins' father. Carter had never seen the man in person, but he knew power when he saw it. Mitchell turned the moment they entered, his voice like steel. "Where were you tonight, Officer Carter?" Carter blinked. "Home. Why?" Mitchell stepped forward. "Because my sons were beaten within an inch of their lives by 2 masked men, and one of them called them troublemakers, the exact same word you used the night you pulled them over." Silence hung thick in the room. Carter's pulse pounded. "I had nothing to do with that." Mitchell's eyes burned into him. "Then you better prove it. Because as of now, I'm pushing for an internal investigation into every officer you've worked with." Captain Martinez spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Carter, until we sort this out, I have to pull you from duty." Aisha exhaled beside him, looking like she expected this, but hated it anyway. Carter swallowed hard, his entire body rigid. He had spent months trying to prove he was different, that he was better, and now all of it was in jeopardy. Aisha's voice was quiet but sharp. "You want to fix this, then you better find out who really did it before the entire department goes down for it." Carter nodded, jaw tight. Because if he didn't, everything, his career, his redemption, and the fragile trust he'd built, would burn to the ground. The journey of Officer Bradley Carter was not about heroism. It was about accountability, change, and the difficult road to redemption. Carter started his time in Oakwood as a man ruled by bias, power, and entitlement, believing that his badge alone commanded respect. But through the struggles, the rejection, and the painful realizations, he learned something far more important. Trust isn't given, it's earned. He discovered that true service isn't about control, but about connection. It's about being present, listening, and acknowledging the experiences of those whose voices are often dismissed. But perhaps the hardest lesson of all, the past doesn't just disappear. Mistakes leave scars, some visible, some not. And sometimes, even when you try to change, not everyone will be ready to accept it. Carter's story is a mirror to real struggles in law enforcement and society as a whole. So, we ask you, can someone truly change, or will their past always define them? Should forgiveness be given freely, or should it be earned? What does real justice look like? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspectives. If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge perspectives and start real conversations. See you in the next one.